Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public policy. We're broadcast on KGPT channel 26.1 and its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me for my blog, The Voice for Liberty. That's on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. There, the motto is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. I cover things that may not be covered by other news media in Wichita and Kansas, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, because these are the things that are important. And these are the things that are so often under attack by our governments, be it at the federal, state, and local level. So please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send 2 or 3 times a week. And if you'd like to contact me, you'll find my email address and telephone number there, or just remember bob.weeks@gmail.com. Well, let's take a look at a few short topics regarding things we've talked about in recent episodes of Wichita Liberty TV. First of all, Kansas Policy Institute has announced its first event exploring issues surrounding a proposed Wichita sales tax increase. This will be held on Thursday, July 17th in Wichita. Presentations will include the Kansas Water Office on the scope of water usage and needs in South Central Kansas. From the City of Wichita, Alan King, who is Director of Public Works, will make a presentation. He'll be accompanied by Wichita City Council member Pete Meitzner. Then, Dr. Art Hall. He's the Executive Director of the Center for Applied Economics at the University of Kansas. He will present on the topic, Are Water Markets Applicable in Kansas? And then finally, a presentation regarding the Wichita Chamber of Commerce Water Task Force findings by Karma Mason, who's president of ISI Environmental. This event starts at 7:30 a.m. with registration. Presentations start at 8 o'clock and will end by about 12:15, and a light breakfast will be served. Kansas Policy Institute asks that you register if you plan to attend this event. It's free. Visit kansaspolicy.org for more information. Now, I think that this will be an important event, especially Dr. Art Hall's presentation about markets for water. You know, the default position of Wichita City government officials is that water must be provided by government, and only government can provide solutions to the problem. Now, it's natural for government officials to feel that way. We've learned from our examination of public choice theory that the motivation of bureaucrats is to expand their sphere of influence and power. And the problem is that many citizens are conditioned to feel that way, too. That only government can provide solutions to things like water and other civic infrastructure. And that seems to me to be a strange assumption for citizens to make. After all, many of the problems we see with infrastructure are caused by government. Government owns the infrastructure, government built the infrastructure, government maintains the infrastructure. And this is especially important in Wichita because, as I've shown you in the past, it was not long ago that we were told Wichita had a secure water supply for the next 50 years. That was about 11 years ago when we were told that. And last week I showed you how the City of Wichita advises people to do things like unplugging clock radios in order to save vanishingly small amounts of vampire electricity. The advice of City Hall is that citizens adds large amounts of inconvenience to their lives in order to save little tiny bits of electricity. But as I've shown you, the city thinks nothing of burning streetlights during the middle of sunny days. Well, is this still a problem? Well, here's a photograph of streetlights in the parking lot of the Wichita Transit Center in downtown Wichita. And I realize it might be difficult to detect that the lights are turned on because, after all, it's the middle of the day, even though it was a little cloudy. Now, waste like this is not acceptable. But waste like this is all the more striking considering that Wichita's transit system is out of money. And the City Council has recommended that Wichitans vote for a higher sales tax, part of which would fund the transit system. Some of that sales tax would be used, I suppose, to continue this wasteful spending of burning streetlights in the middle of the day. So before the transit system asks citizens for more tax money, let's ask that it clean up its own act by eliminating obvious and blatant waste like this. Well, you may have heard that there's an election coming up soon. Kansas holds its primary election on Tuesday, August 5th. The general election will be about 3 months later on November 4th. And some of you may live, as I do, in neighborhoods that have restrictive covenants that prohibit homeowners from placing any signs in their yards except signs advertising homes for sale. But a 2008 Kansas law overrides these restrictive covenants and allows for the placement of small political yard signs starting 45 days before an election. For the August primary election this year, the 45-day period in which signs are allowed started on June 21st, although I could be off by a day because sometimes lawyers count days in strange ways. Now, according to the First Amendment Center, some 50 million people live in neighborhoods with homeowners associations, and laws like the 2008 Kansas law are not without controversy despite the unanimous vote in the Kansas legislature. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that governmental entities like cities cannot stop homeowners from displaying political yard signs. But a homeowners association is not a government. Instead, it's a group that people voluntarily enter. Generally, when prospective homeowners purchase a home in a neighborhood with these types of restrictions, they are asked to sign a document pledging to comply with the provisions in these covenants. And if these covenants prohibit political yard signs, but a Kansas law says these covenants do not apply, well, what should a homeowner do? And should state law trump private contracts in cases like this? So, while Kansas law makes it legal for those living in communities with covenants that prohibit political yard signs, residents may want to observe these covenants anyway, and here's why. If neighbors are not aware of the new Kansas law, and therefore they believe, wrongfully though it may be, that the yard signs are not allowed in your neighborhood, they may think residents with signs in the yards are violating the covenants. And by extension, that could reflect poorly on the candidates that are being promoted. Yes, those who are not aware of the lines allowing yard signs are uninformed, or they may be aware of the law but disagree with it and wish that their neighbors would not display political yard signs. These people, of course, may vote and influence others how to vote. So, whether to display yard signs in a covered neighborhood, that's a judgment that each person will have to make for themselves. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Last week I showed you problems that citizens of Wichita have trying to deal with their city government. And the particular issue involved my difficulties in obtaining a gap analysis document that the city relied upon to make a decision. As I told you last week, I did receive the document that I requested. So this week I appeared before the City Council at the continuation of the public hearing to present my testimony on what I concluded from reading the gap analysis. As an aside, note that the default position of the city was to withhold this document from the public. And, reading between the lines of the agenda, it seems like the city was unhappy that it had to provide this information to citizens. And it's also clear to me that no city council members had seen this document, and that right there is a problem. Now, the purpose of the gap analysis, as you may remember, is to, as city documents state, show a financial need for public assistance in order to complete the project. So I asked the council a rhetorical question. If the gap analysis is credible, that is, if it really is true that projects like this are not financially feasible without taxpayer assistance, well, what does that tell us about Wichita? Shouldn't we work on fixing these problems for everyone, rather than parceling out business welfare on a piecemeal basis? I also noted this. City documents state there is a need for incentives based on the current market, it said. But not long ago, the council was told that downtown Wichita is booming. So why won't the market support a project like this without a handout from city taxpayers? And if downtown is truly booming, but we're still giving out incentives, will we ever be able to wean ourselves off of this incentive? Well, there's another public policy problem. Based on my reading of the gap analysis document, I see another problem with the facade improvement program. It shifts costs from landlords to commercial tenants. That is, instead of paying for the facade improvement costs as part of a mortgage or other financing, these costs become additional property taxes that commercial tenants pay in addition to their rent. Now, this is really a problem, as Kansas and Wichita commercial property taxes are high. Each year, the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, along with the Minnesota Center for Fiscal Excellence, these organizations survey property taxes. And considering the largest city in each of the states, Wichita property taxes are 9th highest in the nation for commercial property. And Wichita taxes are not just a little higher, but a lot higher. For example, for commercial property valued at $100,000, Wichita property taxes are 38% higher than the national average. Now, some of the reasons why commercial property taxes are so high in Kansas and Wichita is due to the differences in assessment rates for various property classes. That's not set by the city of Wichita. But the overall level of spending, and therefore the level of taxation, is set by the Wichita City Council. Furthermore, the cost of incentives like this raise the cost of government for everyone else. So one thing the city could do is to reduce spending somewhere else to offset the cost of this incentive. This would mean that taxpayers do not have to bear the cost of this incentive. So if we wonder why the Wichita economy is not growing, commercial property tax rates and this city council's policy of targeted reductions, well, I think they're a large part of the problem. Now, questions like this, issues like this, these are sometimes above the grasp of Wichita City Council members to understand. Or maybe they do understand, but they don't want to confront issues like this. That may be related to another problem. The beneficiary of this grant of cash program is David Berg. He's received much taxpayer-funded subsidies from the city, state, and federal government over the years. He and his wife make generous campaign contributions to almost all city council members, often making the maximum allowed contributions. Then the city council votes, unanimously, to give him a grant of $20,000 cash with very few strings attached. Now, is this additional evidence of the problem of cronyism in Wichita? Yes, it is. And speaking of problems in Wichita where cronyism may be a contributing factor, I've updated one of the many interactive visualizations I've created at the Voice for Liberty, that's on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. And you may be aware that we've had a planning effort in the area called Visioneering Wichita for about 10 years. And this organization selected Omaha, Kansas City, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City as peer cities for Wichita to compare itself with. And I've gathered data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics through 2013 for the Wichita metropolitan area and for these visioneering peer cities. But I went a step further. I looked at jobs by sector. And here is the growth in Wichita jobs compared to our visioneering peers for local government jobs only. Wichita is the dark line. So when considering local government jobs only, Wichita performs well compared to our visioneering peer cities. Now, here's a chart of private sector job growth for the same cities, Wichita again represented by the dark line. Now, when looking at the growth of jobs in private sector, Wichita is in last place and by a wide margin. This is a problem because it's the private sector that generates the tax revenue that pays for government. And when government grows faster than the private sector, economic activity is shifted away from productive activities to unproductive government spending. The economist Dan Mitchell has proposed what he calls the golden rule of fiscal policy, which is the private sector should grow faster than government. Well, in Wichita, we see our local government proposing to grow itself even more by recommending that visitors approve increased sales tax to pay for more government programs. And officials tell us that the increased spending is needed so that government can correct problems with Wichita's economy, water supply, transit, and streets. On these and other issues, the Wichita Eagle recently quoted Mayor Carl Burmer as saying, "We've put them off for too long. We didn't want the challenges. We didn't want the tax bills. But now, to maintain our quality of life, we've got to catch up." So, Wichita's government has created problems by the mayor's own admission. And now, Wichita politicians and bureaucrats ask that we rely on government to fix these problems. Well, here's what I think is really strange. The mayor said these things, that the city has put off challenges. He said that in order to generate support for a higher sales tax. But the mayor's admission is more evidence that we should not trust our current fleet of bureaucrats and politicians. They simply have not shown themselves capable of managing city assets in a responsible manner. And the worst realization is that the mayor and others blame these problems on citizens for not wanting to pay higher taxes. It's not their fault, it's yours, they say, because you don't want to pay higher taxes to support an irresponsible and wasteful city government. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, last year, the Wichita City Council allocated $1 million to a program to pay rebates to people who purchased water-efficient appliances such as toilets and washing machines. And when the program ended at the close of the year, we found that less than one-half the allocated money had been claimed. So, was that good news or bad news? Well, it was great news, because these water-saving appliances actually save very little water. For example, many people find with low water usage toilets that they must flush twice to accomplish their goal, or worse, they may have to rely to plunging and even more flushing. Now, even if the rebate program had succeeded, and by that I mean success on the city's terms, the amount of water saved is vanishingly small. Over the course of a year, the program could save about one-half of one day's average daily usage, and a single hot day in the summer could wipe out all the savings for an entire year. But things like this just don't seem to matter to the Wichita City Council. Last month, the council decided, on a unanimous vote, to reauthorize the program using the $450,000 left over from last year. Now, the city argues that this program has no cost because these funds are left over from last year's program. And last year the city said the program had no cost because it was funded through water bills, not tax revenues. Well, but the city could have used the money not spent on rebates to either reduce water rates or retire water system debt. Yeah, that's government logic and reasoning. This year we find again that Wichita City Council members want to go down the road of austerity rather than abundance. And austerity is not fun. Life in Wichita is nicer and more attractive to residents and visitors when we are able to use a lot of water at a reasonable price. Under an austerity program, for example, our $3.5 million Waltzing Waters fountains sit idle. Lawns turn brown as people decide not to spend $300 to $500 a month to irrigate. Under a regime of austerity, Wichitans are urged by the city to do things like this advice that I found on the wichita.gov website. It said, wash your fruits and vegetables in a bowl of water instead of under running water. Take that water outside and water the trees in your yard. Well, I thought, since the purpose of washing vegetables is to cleanse them of herbicides and other chemicals, I deduced that after washing them in a bowl of water, you're left with a bowl full of herbicide-laced water. which I think is better suited for dumping on your driveway to kill the grass and weeds growing in the cracks. Well, the worst realization from analyzing this issue and others is how readily citizens, politicians, and bureaucrats will toss aside economic thinking. The anti-market bias that Brian Kaplan explains in his book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies, was in full display, even by the conservative members of the council. For example, many speakers at last year's council meeting used the terms conservation and judicious. Well, I think conservation is good, and judicious use of water is good as well. But each person applies different meanings to these concepts. And a great thing about living in a relatively free economy is that each person gets to choose to spend their time and money on the things that are important to them and in the amounts they want. And we make these choices every day, sometimes many times each day. Sometimes we're aware of making them and sometimes we're not. But these are decisions that we make, not government. But the city just doesn't get it. Instead of turning off streetlights during the day in downtown Wichita, the city scolds citizens for not unplugging clock radios and other appliances when not in use. And instead of letting each citizen decide how to use water, the city taxes us to pay for others to install low-flush toilets. Now, in most areas of life, people use the relative price of things to make decisions about how to allocate their consumption of scarce resources. And Wichita could be doing that with water, but it isn't. And what I mean by that is that the city is proposing to use money collected from a sales tax to pay for a new water supply. A better way to fund a new water source is through water bills. In this way, the people who use something are the ones who pay for it. The cost of something is more clearly associated with its use in this way. We will be aware of the true cost of water, and by having to pay the true price of a resource, businesses and people are better able to weigh the cost of using it versus alternatives. But the Wichita City Council advocates something different. Well, on a closing note, this is the 50th episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I hope we've come a long way since the first episode was broadcast June of last year, and I thank you for watching. And I also wish to thank the people who behind the scenes work to make this show possible. There's Tom Pappert, who produces the show, Devin Pierce, our technician, Michael Scott, our coordinator, Phil Ahrensman, the Assistant General Manager of the station, and Grant Sorensen, who is the Production Manager. And finally, Marion Pappert is our President and Executive Producer. So thank you to everyone. We're committed to doing a better job for you, the viewer, during our next year. So, that's Wichita Liberty TV for this week and also for its first year. Thank you for watching. I'm Bob Weeks.